Okay, it's 10 o'clock sharp, and we're going to get started. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us this morning to talk about the first day letter and answering the new cybersecurity questions. I see we have a lot of people out there today. This must be a very hot topic, and I can understand why. We've got several clients, in fact, that are currently undergoing a field audit, and so that's what precipitated us actually putting this webinar on today, because we've been answering many questions about the cybersecurity questions that are on the first day letter and that are being asked of the auditors to those being audited. The interesting thing about the cybersecurity questions, they are the same across all verticals. So whether you're a check casher, a mortgage broker, a community bank, an insurance agency, they are the same 15 questions for everybody. They've been recast by the Department of Financial Services following the promulgation of 23 NYCRR. My name is Al Alper. I'm president of CyberGuard 360. Some of you on the call today are our clients. Thank you for joining us. Those that aren't, we look forward to you answering any questions you have at the end of this. There's a little Q&A button above the webinar that you'll see. If you have any questions, put them in there. I'll be answering questions at the end of this. We've got a lot of material to cover. Instead of answering each question specifically relative to the cybersecurity questions, I'm going to talk about this in broad topics, and I'll answer any specific questions at the end. Technically, this is a 1-hour webinar, but I'll stay as long as anybody out there needs me to. I do have a hard stop, though, at 12 o'clock, so I think 2 hours is max. Anyway, let's get started, shall we? Okay, so in a brief overview today, this is where we are. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the first slides. We all know where we are today. Everything in red that you see throughout the document relative to the bullet points have to be complied with by everybody. Whether you're a limited exempt or a non-exempt organization, everybody has to comply with those items I've highlighted in red. Those items that are listed in black, only non-exempt organizations have to comply with that. Just as a quick refresher, limited exempt organizations are organizations with less than 10 employees, less than $5 million in gross revenue in the last 3 years, and less than $10 million or less than $10 million in assets for the last 3 years. So again, I'm not going to cover where we are today. Tomorrow, these are the upcoming deadlines that everybody should already be aware about. If not, this webinar is going to be made available on our website following the end of this, within the hour or two after we're done. And you can go back and get a refresher. You'll get a link to this as well. Okay? And make sure you stick around to the end. We're going to give away a free cybersecurity policy of your choice, a written information security policy, an acceptable use policy, a password policy, or a breach response policy. We have a website where you can go and get that from us. We're also going to have special webinar-only pricing on our CyberGuard plans for those that aren't clients or those who are clients and may want to upgrade. We do have special pricing at the end of this webinar. This isn't going to be a terribly salesy-oriented one. This is more about information for you. We do pepper it with a little bit about CyberGuard, but that notwithstanding, I'm going to answer any questions you have on the cybersecurity questions. So just a little background on the DFS Cyber Initiative. The governor announced some protection measures. DFS promulgated the reg. As you know, Superintendent Vullo, she's been going out there and pitching New York as the model for the country, and other states are picking it up right now. DFS restated their film security questions. The 27 through 41 are the numbers for mortgage brokers. For insurance agencies, I believe it's 15 through, don't quote me on that. Anyhow, they're the same 15 questions. A particular note is that DFS has now hired cybersecurity experts headquartered in Albany, that field auditors have been directed to refer anomalies in the field to, either things they don't understand about your cybersecurity posture or questions that they don't feel are being answered. They get referred back up to Albany and the cybersecurity audits for a second round of scrutiny. They've reconstituted surprise audits. One of the gentlemen on this call right now actually has a surprise audit that he's in the middle of. They walked in with the first day letter in hand and said, "Hi, we need a few things from you." One of those things they asked for right away were the cybersecurity policies and procedures that they had in place. So this is a big push by DFS. I'm sure you're all aware. As I said, the cybersecurity questions, this is on the mortgage broker side, are questions 27 through 41, 15 questions in total. They are the same 15 questions for everybody. So what we go through verticals that are on this call today, and I see that we've got 5 verticals on this call. Terrific. So we're going to be covering a lot, and it's relevant for all of you. So there's nothing specific for any one particular vertical that's on this call. Okay, so as I said, I was going to talk more broadly about the questions themselves because there are a lot, and if I went through all 15 individually, we'd be here for a lot more than just 2 hours. And so what I did was I broke these questions up categorically as to what you can do that will answer certain aspects of the regulation specifically. So to begin with, a risk assessment. The way the reg reads, everybody has to take a risk assessment. And a risk assessment, it's not terribly difficult to get through, depending on whether or not you're an outsourced client with us. We'll actually interview you and do it for you. But that notwithstanding, everybody has to take a risk assessment. Risk assessments generally run between 40 and 80 questions. They cover broad aspects of your organization, administratively, physically, and technically. And they outline the risk posture of the organization writ large. And so when you take a risk assessment, right away, the outcome of that risk assessment, which is a work plan, answers 5 questions of the cybersecurity regulation. You're going to answer, in this case, S29. And again, I'm using the mortgage broker as a reference. What I'll do is I'll put out a cheat sheet after this webinar that'll say security question 1, security question 2, 3, and then you'll relate it back to your particular vertical. So 29, 30, 31, 33, and 38 are all answered simply by taking a risk assessment, which in turn generates something called a work plan. And what a work plan is, it is the outcome of the risk assessment which has identified deficiencies or gaps in your security posture. And that work plan not only identifies them, it provides prescriptive or remedial recommendations for filling those gaps, whether those are technological measures or they're policy, procedure, and training measures. Regardless of what they are, a risk assessment and work plan, a risk assessment identifies them, and a work plan provides prescriptive measures for them. Okay? And so by doing a risk assessment, you answer 5 questions. Again, we provide a risk assessment for all of our clients, no matter which plan you're on. The plan you're on dictates how much help we give you with it, but that outcome for everybody, we generate a work plan for you. And that work plan, again, are the prescriptive measures relative to the gaps that the risk assessment identified. And if anybody's interested, I'm happy to show you what a risk assessment looks like. We can do that at the end as part of the Q&A session. Again, there's a Q&A button at the top of your screen. Enter any questions you have in there, and I'll be answering them towards the end. But a risk assessment is fairly easy to go through. It should take you a few hours if you're doing it yourself, a few hours assuming that you've gathered the information you need, because again, you're answering questions relative to the administrative aspects of the organization, what the organization structure looks like, how you implement policies and procedures, how you enforce them, the physical aspects of the organization, where servers are located, do you lock your front door, do you have screen protectors on, things like that. And the technological aspects of the organization, what are your password policies, do you enforce them, where does NPI or PII reside? NPI stands for non-public information, and that's the terminology that DFS uses. PII, which stands for personally identifiable information, we use that more generically, and that generally covers DFS, HIPAA, Gramm-Leach-Bliley, etc. So PII is a more generic term for what DFS calls NPI. And so again, a risk assessment, here's sort of the overview of the risk assessment, if you would. So as you can see, they cover administrative, physical, and technical aspects of the organization. Our risk assessment is 55 questions in length. Generally, people who do this on their own take about 2 to 3 hours to complete. We make some recommendations at the onset of what you should gather in advance of answering these questions. The questions that we pose are yes, no, or not applicable. And so it's a very easy to go through Q&A process. At the end of that process, again, we generate a work plan for you. And together that work plan covers approximately, it's actually a little more than that. A little more than 1/3 of the cybersecurity questions on the first day letter are answered by the risk assessment and the work plan that it generates. Policies and procedures. So these are the meat and potatoes of the regulation. In fact, if you read the regulation, if you couldn't sleep one night, I'm sure you took it out and read it so you can quickly go to sleep. But the first two elements of the regulation that you're required to do is have a program and a policy set in place. And so the policies and procedures are the meat and potato, we call it, of the regulation. They cover 500.02 and 500.03, which again are the first two actionable items of the regulation. And if you take a look on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see that, in fact, that question, it outlines all of the policies and procedures that an auditor is looking for. Now, some of this is not going to necessarily be applicable for limited exempt organizations. One of the nice things about the regulation, I realize saying nice things in regulation seems oxymoronic, but one of the nice things about the regulation is for limited exempt organizations that do regular monitoring, and even to some extent for non-exempt organizations that do regular monitoring, you don't have to do a regular risk assessment. And so if you have ongoing monitoring and management of your risk profile, the risk assessment becomes optional after the initial one. Okay? So the policies and procedures that you develop are a direct result of two things. They're a direct result of the risk assessment and the work plan that was generated, because you need to develop policies and procedures and implement technologies where necessary to mitigate the risks identified in the risk assessment and the work plan. But further, you need to have a more broad array of policies in place to demonstrate that you are in fact protecting data. Because again, a risk assessment is only identifying gaps in your prescriptive protective measures. Your overall policy and procedure set has to demonstrate that you're protecting the information that you store. DFS's goal here is to make sure that you're doing everything you can to protect consumer data, non-public information, personally identifiable information, information that in the wrong hands exposes them to identity theft and fraud and other things. And so your responsibility is to protect that. And the policies and procedures that you implement govern how you protect that. And you can't just have policies and procedures, you actually have to be implementing and enforcing them. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through that. So those elements that you see on the left-hand side of your screen are what the auditors are looking for. Again, these are boilerplate questions that they ask when they come in. They're the same for all verticals, and you just want to make sure that you have these policies and procedures in place. They are not necessarily individual policies and procedures. For some of our clients, we build one policy document that has all of these, and for others, they're in fact individual ones if that's what you so desire. Okay. So policies and procedures, again, if you're a client of ours, we give you policies and procedures. On the self-serve side, you get them as templates. On the outsource side, we actually customize them for you. There's a robust policy set. I think our current cybersecurity set for this regulation stands at 37 policies. Most of our clients only use, I want to say 12 or 13. We're going to give you one of these 4 that you see on screen right now at the end of this if you stick around till the end. Okay? With your policies and procedures, risk assessment, and work plan that you put together, you're covering and satisfying some 2/3 of the overall regulation. So, but just by doing these things, you're really getting through a significant number of questions and answers for the cybersecurity reg. Okay? Oversight and control. So these are covered in 4 questions. And in this, you have all of your reviews and reports. Your risk assessment initially constitutes that. So it'll initially, the first go round this year, in fact, will answer that. But on an ongoing basis, you need to be monitoring and managing your environment to identify the risks that you have exposed, as well as identify events that happen. A key element of this regulation is the reporting. That's actually what makes it so burdensome for a lot of our clients, is the monitoring and reporting aspects, because the regulation says that any event, whether or not it was successful, so even if you stopped it from happening, if the measures you put in place prevented it from happening, if it would have materially impacted non-public information, NPI, PII is the terminology we use, you must report it to the Department of Financial Services. You can do it online, so it's not difficult to report. Where it is difficult is that you have to be vigilant. You have to be constantly monitoring it. And so the oversight and control questions of the audit speak to this. What policies and procedures do you have in place that demonstrate that you're overseeing and monitoring, managing, reporting events that are going on in your environment? And then what you are doing, are you reporting them upstream? Is management aware of it? Are those responsible for the cybersecurity posture of the organization aware of that? And so these questions speak to that. They also speak to training. And so not everybody has to do cybersecurity training. So this, for the limited exempt organizations, you actually don't have to do cybersecurity training. We strongly encourage you to do training. The reasons are legion, the least of which, however, is that the more aware your team members are of what a cyber threat looks like, what to be on the lookout for. See something, say something is the terminology they use throughout New York, right? You've seen it on, if you're on take mass transit or whatnot. But if you're aware of what cyber attacks and cyber events look like, you stand a greater chance of thwarting them and a greater chance of not falling victim, which by definition means you're doing a much better job than most of your contemporaries who don't do regular training. But more importantly, that's looked upon positively by the Department of Financial Services, because it means you're proactively involved in protecting your clients. The good thing about cyber training, it doesn't take very long. So in our portal, our cybersecurity training, which is self-directed and online, is a 1-hour program. It's broken up into 4 15-minute segments. Each individual can go through. They can do it during their lunch break, when they first come in the morning over a cup of coffee. At the end of that, they get a nice certificate. We have many of our clients who take those certificates and put them in a folder so that they can show the auditors when they come in. And then after they complete that training, they get regular refreshers. Every week in their inbox, they will get a short video from us, typically 90 seconds to 3 minutes long, that tell you about what the latest threat looks like to be on the lookout for. And why do we do that? We do that because kind of think about algebra when you were in high school. If you haven't used it since you've been in high school, chances are you couldn't tell me the area of a triangle, because frankly, who remembers those calculations? Those are formulas that we studied for a test, and we said it, forget it, and we forgot it. So with a refresher, it's constantly front and center. Every week, we are going to remind you, this is what a cyber attack looks like. This is what cyber events look like. This is what you need to be on the lookout for in your inbox, on the telephone, whatever. because phone breaches exist. And I can tell you, so we ran what we call white hat hacking, and that's where you try to hack into a company at their request to see if their measures that they've taken are doing any good. And part of that is we make a phone call and we try to get somebody's password. And I cannot tell you how many times that we've been successful at that. So hackers use the phone as well. So this is not just a technology play. This is a security play. We want to protect you, help you protect your customers, and help you be compliant. Okay? So every week we keep refreshers front and center so that everybody is well aware of what a cyber attack looks like, or what cyber events look like, etc. Okay? You have to make sure you're recording everything, minutes of any meeting. Oh, I jumped ahead, didn't I? Sorry about that. So S41 speaks to the minutes of any meeting where cybersecurity was discussed. This doesn't necessarily mean that anytime you talk about it in the office, but the moment you're talking about cybersecurity with management or some committee that's been designated to direct or oversee the cybersecurity program of the organization, you have to keep minutes of that. And so you have to make sure that you're documenting all of this and you're keeping a record somewhere, somehow, some way, so that you can produce those documents to answer this question. Now, you do have an obligation of having at least regular annual meetings. And so at least annually, you're going to have documents relative to the minutes of those meetings. But frankly, you're going to want to have meetings anytime an event occurs. So you're going to not just want to be reacting to that event, but you're going to want to have a meeting with who's ever responsible for the program. Sometimes that's management, sometimes it's a committee of one or more, to discuss what the event was, how it occurred, what prescriptive measures do you need to take in addition to what's already there, or what measures don't work as well that need to be revamped or beefed up to be an impediment for future attacks. And so anytime you have those meetings, we call them debriefs. But anytime you have those meetings, you're going to make sure you have minutes of that. They don't need to be 100% narratives that consume pages and pages. They're regular minutes of a meeting. Discuss this. This is what we identified. These were the outcomes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you're going to want to file that away. In the portal that we provide our customers, we have a place where you can store these documents, all of these documents, in fact, and some of our clients do use that as the storage facility. So in the event they are the unfortunate victims of an audit, everybody's going to be, and I'm just kidding around. I mean, unfortunately, it's the reality we live in when we're regulated by DFS, because they're just trying to protect the consumer. And so you want to make sure that you store that. We do provide that facility in the portal. Otherwise, if you have a place where you store those documents, make sure that you do that. Keep them well organized, because you're going to want to get to them quickly. We have one of our clients right now. He's on his 5th week of an audit. Some of that has to do with the disorganization as to where the documentation was, and so gathering of all of that took the better part of a week. But that notwithstanding, in general, audits run 2 to 3 weeks. Some people go a little bit longer depending on who that is, but that notwithstanding, as long as you have everything that you can hand off to them, give them, and in an organized fashion, then you get out of that just very quickly. And realistically, they're not looking to hurt you. They're looking to make sure that you're doing your job. That's all. And so as long as you're doing that, terrific. Okay? So again, part and parcel of this is that you have to be overseeing, monitoring, auditing, and reporting everything that goes on in your environment. Our platform, CyberGuard 360, does that for you. If you're self-serve or you're assisted, we give you the capabilities to do some or most of that as well. Because the biggest lift in this, as I said earlier, was this monitoring and overseeing. So if you're doing it manually, let's say you've got 5 users in your office, as an example. Your small office, you've got 3 to 5 users going around to every machine and speaking to every user about what events occurred, if any, that they know about, looking at logs, you're going to be consuming hours every week. And so you may want to put it off to every 2 weeks, though I don't recommend that. Certainly, you want to be aware of what's going on. You're going to consume an enormous number of hours. So whether you use us or whether you use somebody else, you're going to want to make sure, even if you're doing it yourself, you're going to want to make sure that you use technologies that give you what we call single pane of glass visibility into your environment so that you're able to monitor it. We have some clients who've got hundreds of users. If they had to walk around to every machine, it would be a literal full-time job, and they wouldn't get through it in a month at all, just to go through and pour through every log. A small office is going to take several hours every week. A large office like that, not so much. So you need a single pane of glass in terms of visibility to get out there and see what's going on in your environment. We offer that solution. There are others in the market today that offer that solution, whether they're providing DFS solutions or whether you're just looking for technology that does that. They're out there. I strongly encourage you to go and find that, because you must be monitoring, auditing, and reporting on the events in your environment. That is an absolute must. And if you're not doing that, they will know. As I mentioned early on, they hired cybersecurity experts who now live up in Albany, and field auditors are referring to them when they see anomalies in your environment, whether they don't understand what you're doing, so they're looking for clarification, or they feel you're not doing, or in fact, you're not providing them the information. They refer all of those up to the cyber team in Albany for a second round of scrutiny and audit, specifically on the cybersecurity elements. And so make sure you're out there looking for something that gives you that single pane of glass visibility into the organization and what's going on. Questions S34 through 36 and 40, these are the administrative functions of the organization. And so in terms of that, these are the big things that management, administration, those in charge with the cybersecurity program of the organization, they have to do. Some of you would have already done this. Again, some of these deadlines have passed. If you filed for your limited exemption, this is S34. This is that question that asks, if you're claiming limited exemption, they want you to justify that to them. Provide the documentation that you used to determine that you were a limited exempt organization. Limited exempt organizations have to meet one or more of the three criteria. You're less than 10 employees, so you can satisfy that with an organizational chart. You're under $5 million in gross revenue. You can satisfy that with financial statements such as trial balance, balance sheet, et cetera. Or you're less than $10 million in assets. Again, you can satisfy that with financial statements. But you need to have that documentation in place so that you can provide for that, assuming you filed for limited exemption. Remember also that the moment you no longer meet one of those, so again, you only have to do one. So as long as you only have under 10 employees, or only have less than 5 million, or only have in gross revenue, or only less than 10 million, in assets, you enjoy limited exemption. But the moment you have none of those, you are no longer limited exempt, and you have 180 days to file your exemption. I'm sorry, to let DFS know and then comply with the other areas of the regulation. My apologies. So you have 180 days after you're no longer limited exempt to comply with the rest of the regulation that you weren't complying with before. Conversely, if you were a non-exempt organization and then you met one of those, you can enjoy limited exemption. You have 180 days to file your exemption with DFS. So if, for example, you had 20 people were throwing off 7 million in revenue, but you drop below 10 million in assets on March 1, by June, you need to have filed your limited exemption. And then you enjoy a limited exemption from the balance of the regulation. And those are some big things, so that's not a small lift. So multi-factor authentication, mobile device management, there's a lot of elements to the overall regulation that limited exempt members don't have to comply with that non-exempt do, and they are not an inexpensive effort. So just know that. Okay? Company on S35, they want an org chart. That's very simple. But in that org chart, because you're going to be providing that already, but in that org chart, you need to call out, highlight, specify the person responsible for the cybersecurity program. And if you're outsourcing it to a company like us, the person to whom we report, because they are then the identified person responsible for the ongoing cybersecurity oversight of the organization. And so we're in that org chart that you'd provide otherwise within the first day letter, call out specifically who is the person responsible for that. If they're a W-2'd Chief Information Security Officer, otherwise known as a CISO, or if it's a person responsible for interfacing with a third party like CyberGuard 360, or a person responsible and you're doing it all in-house yourself, you just need to be called out on that org chart so that you're easily identifiable by the auditors. If you are employing your own CISO, your own Chief Information Security Officer, you have to include their resume in this. It has to demonstrate that they have the credentials to be performing this job function. Okay? Terrific. S36, so if you're using a third party, like CyberGuard 360, a copy of the agreement that demonstrates what we do for you has to be included in that. Again, if you're using us, a copy of your agreement is uploaded in our portal already. If you're not using us or you're not using the portal robustly, make sure you keep a copy of our agreement or whoever else you're using agreement in that same folder where you're keeping all your other documentation, because they want to see exactly what it is that the third-party provider is doing for you, and making sure that where there are gaps in what they do versus what the regulation requires, someone is filling those gaps inside the organization. So maybe you have two third parties satisfying that for you. You'll need both agreements. Or maybe you're doing all of it, then you don't need any agreement, and that's not applicable. Or people in the organization are doing some of it, and the third party like us are doing the rest of it. Just make sure that when you note it in the agreement what they do, you're clearly noting, and when you're answering the other questions, who in your organization is doing that. Those are questions that are being asked by those auditors. So just know that. And then S40, that's that big lift we talked about, reporting any events. Okay, so S40 speaks to events that you haven't already. So cyber events. An event is an attack of some sort on your organization. Again, whether successful or otherwise isn't germane to this. They don't care if they weren't successful in attacking you. They want it reported if it would have materially impacted non-public information. And so they expect you to report. That's the big lift. This question says, all right, anything you haven't already reported to the department, give them a list of all those events or incidents that happened. Now, the key to good administration on your part for this regulation is your vigilance in monitoring and reporting. And if you're vigilant at it, then this question is not applicable, because you will have already reported it to the Department of Financial Services. Okay? And again, with CyberGuard 360, we provide alerting and reporting on your behalf. If you're outsourced, we do reporting on your behalf. Check with whomever you're using if you're not using CyberGuard 360 to see what they do for you and what they provide in terms of reporting, because you must be reporting to DFS. I will tell you that if you're giving them things that you haven't reported that are more than 3 days old, you're going to have a problem because you have a reporting requirement to DFS. Okay? Okay, so a little cheat sheet. And these are the various questions. Again, there are 15. This webinar, again, is going to be made available to everybody at the end of this. Okay? But this is a quick cheat sheet. I know we went over a lot. And again, if you have any questions, I see someone asked a question already. I'll get to that in a few minutes. But if you have any questions, please just click on the Q&A and ask away. I talked about this more broadly. And so if you have specific questions about any particular element of the regulation, I'm happy to answer that relative to the cybersecurity questions. Okay? So the first question speaks to risk assessments, et cetera. The first question speaks to your program's policies, et cetera. The risk assessment work plan and all the policies and procedures speak to that. The second question is, when was it reported to the board, et cetera? Because you actively participate in any risk assessment, this is true for everybody writ large. You are an intimate participant in developing in the risk assessment. You have to be. By definition, you have to be, because a risk assessment covers administrative, physical, and technical aspects of the organization. And because it literally covers the entire organization and all aspects of it, you're an intimate participant of the risk assessment. And so that participation and that review of the work plan when that's all done, and the customizing of cybersecurity policies and procedures answer the second question of the cybersecurity questions of the first day letter. Okay? Now remember, anybody, us included, we can develop policies and procedures for you. We do that for our clients. You're still going to have to edit them and make changes because it has to comport to your culture. No organization are identical. So we build a policy set for you, or whoever you're using builds a policy set for you that look and feel like organizations of your size, your scope, and your industry. But not every organization interacts with their team and their technology the same. And so anybody who gives you policies and procedures, us included, CyberGuard as well, you're going to have to read all of them, go through them, and make edits and changes so they comport with your company's culture. Because I'll tell you right now, if you take anybody else's policies and procedures, ours as well, and you hand them off to an auditor, and if they are clearly boilerplate, you are going to have a problem. Because DFS in their FAQ specifically stated templates of policies and procedures don't constitute your policies and procedures. They have to comport to your company's culture. And so, for instance, when we give a client our customized policies based on the work we've done with them, they're still going to spend a couple of hours or a good day editing them, depending on how many they have, to comport with their culture. So I'll give you an example. We have a client right now who he had a surprise audit, a walk-in audit. He was given the first day letter. He was handed the first day letter by the auditor, and he spent, and that was, I think, I want to say a Thursday, but it might not have been a Thursday, but he spent the better part of 2 days editing his policies and procedures that we had already given him months earlier to comport with his organization. He did it at the last minute. That's not to say that it wasn't a good or a bad thing. He did get it done before he had to turn it over. Point being is he spent 2 days because he had 17 policies that he ended up needing from us that he had to go through and edit and comport to his culture. So this isn't something you can wait till the last minute for. Wherever you're getting your policies and procedures from, you must go through them and make sure that you can enforce them and that you can implement them successfully. Because a policy on a shelf, if not implemented and enforced, is a fine waiting to happen. Because you will invariably have a security hole identified that if you had policies and procedures covering it, and then they're subsequently identified, clearly you're not implementing those policies and procedures. And so make sure that wherever you get your policies and procedures from, you go through them, you edit them to comport with your organization. For our CyberGuard clients, you do that, you give them back to us, we put them up in your portal, or you can upload them yourselves. That first rendition we've customized for you based on the risk assessment, the work plan, and the interviews that we've had with you, okay? S39, the risk assessment itself, again, if you look at all these areas in this cheat sheet, as I remember I said earlier, the risk assessment policies and procedures cover the lion's share of this. So if you look at this cheat sheet, almost in every single one of these questions, and one of these answers, the policies, procedures, risk assessment, and work plan cover this. There are areas that are not relevant to limited exempt organizations, and there are other areas that are ameliorated by ongoing monitoring for everybody. You do have to do, I just want to speak to risk assessment for one more second. You do have to do a risk assessment a second time or a third time or more when the conditions of the organization has changed. What do I mean by that? So you replace servers, you should do a risk assessment. If you've changed your organizational structure, you should do a risk assessment. You've moved, you should do a risk assessment. Because the foundational structure of the original risk assessment has changed. Yes, even replacing a server. Because when an IT person, and we have an IT service company, when we build a brand new server to replace an existing server for a client, we're building it to mirror what the other one has, but it's a new build. Maybe one of the guys missed something. So you still have to do a risk assessment to make sure that the new infrastructure meets or comports with the security posture of the organization. So when you change employees, not so much, right? That's not an organizational change. But what if you consolidate departments? What if you move departments to different areas of the office, and the departments you've moved have access to data that they're no longer in that space, and you forgot to get rid of the data that was there? And so those things would in fact instigate a new risk assessment, but frankly, that's few and far between. Servers do happen. I'm not going to say that doesn't happen, but servers only happen once every 4, 5, 6, 7 years, sometimes 8 or 9 for some of you. That hurts me, but as an IT person, that hurts me. But anyway, realistically, ongoing monitoring ameliorates the need to do a risk assessment unless and until the organization or infrastructure changes. Then you'll need to go through that again. The good news is, again, if you're a CyberGuard client, the risk assessment is part of what we give you no matter which plan you choose. It's available online. It resets each year, so you can't do 2 risk assessments in a year. Now, I know one of the questions you're going to give me, so before you ask it, is, what if we restructure it within that year? Well, we can go in the back end and reset it, so that's okay. In general, people don't do it more than once a year at most, and so that's not typically necessary. Okay? In terms of other items here, this is all pretty much self-explanatory. I know I see that we only have one question, so I'm going to linger a little bit longer before I answer questions, unless a few other people have questions. I'll just go through a few other elements of this. You want to make sure that when you're doing you want to make sure you're meeting the requirements. Let's start with that. You've got some upcoming things that are happening, but more importantly, you want to make sure that you're monitoring, reporting. I cannot say that strongly enough. More importantly, that whatever monitoring and reporting you're doing, you must keep a record. Because as the last question speaks to, auditing, reporting, monitoring, and managing is what they're looking for. When an auditor comes in, or if they refer up to the cyber team in Albany, They're not going to say, show me your logs at the endpoint. They're going to say, show me the reports you were using to monitor that. Show me the audit trail of where people took training. Show me, show me, show me. That's what they're going to be looking for. And so you need to make sure that you have a robust audit trail and a robust reporting trail so that when they do ask those questions, you have answers at the ready. Again, if you're a CyberGuard 360 client, all of that will be in your portal. If you're not, or if you're not utilizing it to its full extent, set aside a special file cabinet. They're enforcing this regulation, so set aside a special folder, whatever the case may be. Organize it so that you're retaining all of that data. So when they walk in, like they did for our client a couple of weeks ago, or like they're doing for our other clients right now who are receiving their first day letter, I've got one of the things that we do for our assisted and outsourced clients. If you get your first day letter, send it to us. We'll either help you or we will answer those questions for you where we're doing the work. So in outsourced, we do the work. So when you get your first day letter, and I have one in my inbox, I will answer those questions and send them back to you for your review, your edit, your confirmation, because ultimately you're responsible. But we answer those for our clients already. So make sure that, and we have all this available to us, which is how we do that. If you're answering these or someone else is helping you with these, make sure you have that audit and reporting trail so that you can answer these quickly, deliberately, diligently. You want to make sure that the field auditor is comfortable that you're doing your job. You don't want them referring it upstream to the cyber team in Albany. Not because they're worse, but they're going to do a deeper proctology exam. And that's much more work for you. That's much more work for us. And so we want you to get out of that unscathed. And an audit and reporting trail is the surest way to do that. Okay? All right. I promise you, if you stuck around to the end, I'm going to answer questions in a moment. There's only one out there, so that's going to be nice and quick. If you go to our website, and the URL's up there, cyberguard360.com/March special, you can fill out the form and choose one of those policies or procedures that we talked about in the beginning: the written information security plan, the acceptable use policy, the password policy, or the breach response policy. Those are templates that you can download, edit, and have them comport to your organization. Choose any one of those. When you do fill that out, one of our team will get in touch with you. They'll give you some special pricing if you're interested in availing yourselves of CyberGuard 360 services. I'll leave this up here. Let me take a look. I see we have a question here. Let me go and answer that. Okay, so the question is that they're part of a statewide group of nonprofits of CDFIs, which are community development financial institutions with exempt licenses. So the answer is yes. We do have, and do we have recommendations for groups like that? So I need to know a little bit. I'm a little bit familiar with CDFIs, frankly, from a past life. But that notwithstanding, it depends, frankly, on the way the organization is structured. Is the overarching organization taking care of your cyber policies, procedures, oversight, etc.? In other words, are you as a covered entity? Are you covered by that organization? I don't believe you are. You'll need to check with that organization, but typically organizations like that, like other associative organizations, they're not doing the oversight and enforcement. You're doing that. And as a result of that, you need to do your own 23 NYCRR 500 enforcement. There's no way around that. You're going to need policies and procedures. The question is how much, and that is dependent on how much the other organization is doing for you, how much MPI you transact versus what's held with third-party servicers, etc. Okay? So, and this is true really for anybody. So, everybody on this call, and I know a lot of you, so that's a broad statement, I realize. But to some degree, you're using software or tools that are housed elsewhere, that they're hosted by another company. So if you're using Experian, there's a perfect example. I think everybody on this call is probably using some sort of credit bureau. And so credit bureaus are considered third-party services. They host it. And so you don't necessarily have to have a cyber policy relative to that, but you do need to make sure that because they're hosting your non-public information, that's right, it's yours, like it or not, that they are taking protective measures at least commensurate with what you're doing. And so I know the regulation calls for in the future, not right now, that you have a third-party servicing agreement or an addendum to their agreement that says they protect the data as well as you. Frankly, organizations such as Calyx or Experian or Applied Systems, I'm using a bunch of different verticals in there to touch on everybody on the call, they're not going to sign things like that. And so one of the policies that you'll need to get and that we provide for our clients is one that says that you've reviewed the policies of your third-party providers, and you know that, and you agree, that their policies meet or exceed the protection policies you have in place. And that's your way of backstopping your third-party provider, because the regulation specifically says you're obligated to protect the data, regardless of who you use or don't use. And so what you could say, well, I gave that to Experian, they got breached. Yes, I know they actually did get breached. But point is that you took prescriptive measures, you reviewed their policies and procedures, and they're doing at least what you do. And therefore, that covers you under 23 NYCRR 500, the cybersecurity policy. Okay? Okay, we got another question out there. I'm a 3-person office. They want me to do pen testing. Pen testing is not required of you by DFS. I've heard the same thing from other clients where the auditor said they wanted to see the results of a pen test. You do not have to do a pen test, except. So what's the except? The except is if you have a front-facing application, meaning if you take applications that contain NPI, non-public information, on the web, meaning that they're public-facing, you need to do a pen test. There's no way around that. And that's because you're exposing to the public areas of your systems that contain non-public information. And so as a result of that, you have to do what's called a penetration test or a pen test. If you don't have an application that's front-facing, a web-based application as an example, then you don't have to do a pen test. And they're mistaken, okay? So, and they don't know that because they're just, again, they're auditors, this is new to them as well. They're just sort of reading a bunch of bullet points saying, oh, okay, a pen test. You don't have to do that. You don't have a front-facing app. However, I will say, some of our clients use Office 365, and they use SharePoint in Office 365. And in SharePoint, they're keeping documents that contain NPI. You have to do a pen test. And I would strongly encourage you not to keep documents that contain NPI up in SharePoint. Because frankly, Microsoft Office has been hacked more times than I can tell you. I mean, it's routine that they get hacked. If you're using Microsoft Office out there, I am going to strongly encourage you to turn on multi-factor authentication. Write that down. Turn on multi-factor authentication, because that's what comes with Office 365. It will I don't want to say prevent because nothing stops you from being hacked. It will certainly mitigate the opportunity to be hacked by having somebody get your Office 365 password. Because what a multi-factor authentication is you have a regular password you type in, and I would argue everybody on this call has the same password for at least 3 or 4 different systems, right? And so they get one, they're going to get a bunch because they've gotten one, and now they can get into a bunch of your systems. Office 365 gets hacked, I swear, every day because people's passwords get stolen. With multi-factor authentication, it's a second method of confirming who you are. So when I enter my password in Office 365, I get a text message with a code I then have to re-enter. And it only comes to my phone. It's the only phone that's tied to it. And so if somebody were to steal my password, they couldn't get in. And so again, turn on multi-factor authentication if you're using Office 365. It's a de minimis extra charge on your 365 account. I think it's a couple of dollars a user, but it will protect you, especially if you're using SharePoint. So again, no, you don't have to do pen testing if you're a 3-person office unless you're hosting. Follow up, just full apps. What about lead gen with names, addresses, and date of birth? So DFS, our names, addresses, and date of birth, are they considered non-public information? Not really, but every auditor is different. So if you had a name and a policy number, yeah. If you had a name and a loan number, yeah. But those 3 items together, arguably, and you'll get some auditors who may see that differently, that's non-public information. I'm sorry, excuse me. That's public information available today if you did a Google search on somebody. And so that is not what I would consider. If someone asked me, if one of our clients said to me, hey, Al, is this public or not? I'd say that's public information. Name, address, date of birth is public information. Add a policy, a loan, or other number that identifies them to your other systems that contain non-public information. You then have non-public information. And that would have to be either taken off the web or you'd have to do a pen test. Okay? Any other questions out there? No? All right. I think we went through that pretty well. Frank, I do see your question. I'll call you after. All righty. I'm glad. I appreciate everybody joining us. I'll lift this up on the screen long enough really quick. Here's our contact information. If you want to reach out, if you have any questions, you want to provide any feedback on this webinar, please do. We always want to make it better. This is the first time we're doing this one. If you think I could do it better the next time, if you think we can provide different information, if you'd like other webinars on this topic, I'm happy to do it. Please call, email me directly if you want. Let me know what you'd like to hear. We put on this webinar because a number of our clients and a number of prospects have called us because they've gotten a first day letter. The questions were always the same, and the answers are generally the same. And so this just made a lot of sense, certainly by the number of people who joined us today and signed up. It's a very hot topic. But if there's anything else, I'm happy to go over that. I appreciate you joining us. I'll leave this on the screen for another few seconds. Feel free to give me a ring. Have a great day.